Picture this: a city ablaze, flames licking the sky as its people move with eerie purpose, carving symbols into the earth with a desperation that borders on devotion. This isn't just destruction, it's a message, a final act so deliberate, so haunting, that it echoes across centuries. What could drive an entire civilization to turn their homes into ashes, not out of defeat, but as a warning? This is the enigma of the city that burned themselves into maps to warn future civilizations. A mystery so profound it's left historians and archaeologists grappling for answers. These scorched maps, etched into the land like a cry frozen in time, aren't just remnants of a lost people, they're a puzzle meant for us. Theories swirl like smoke around this ancient act. Was it a prophecy foretelling doom, a curse meant to shield the future, or something even darker? The symbols left behind twisting lines, cryptic patterns seem to whisper secrets just beyond our grasp. Some believe these maps were a desperate plea, a way to say, "Don't follow our path." Others think they mark something hidden, a danger buried deep, waiting. But one thing is clear, this wasn't just an ending. It was a deliberate, calculated act of communication across time. And the chilling question remains, were they trying to save us? As we peel back the layers of this mystery, we'll journey through scorched earth and fragmented history, piecing together clues that defy simple explanation. These maps aren't just artifacts, they're a bridge between their world and ours, a warning etched in fire. What did they know that we don't, and what does their message mean for us today? Strap in, because this isn't just a story about the past. It's a revelation that might just change how we see our future. The answers lie in the ashes, and we're about to read them. The first whispers of this burning city didn't come from archaeologists or historians. They came from the lips of storytellers, passed down through generations like a sacred torch. Imagine sitting by a fire centuries ago, listening to an elder speak of a people who saw their own demise written in the stars. In these tales, the city's inhabitants weren't victims of chance. They were seers, their eyes fixed on a horizon dark with foreboding. The legends describe a council of elders gathered in solemn debate, weighing the unthinkable, not how to survive, but how to ensure their warning would outlast them. And so they chose fire, not as an end, but as a beginning. They reshaped their doom into a message, scorching symbols into the earth with the precision of scribes. These stories share haunting echoes across cultures. Some speak of birds fleeing the city days before the flames, an omen ignored until it was too late. Others tell of strange lights in the sky, or a silence so heavy it choked the air. But the core remains the same, a people who turned their final moments into something deliberate, even artistic. The land itself became their parchment, the flames their quill. It's as if they weren't just leaving a warning, they were writing a letter to the future. Yet for every believer, there's a skeptic. Modern scholars dissect these tales, questioning whether the city ever existed at all. Could this be a metaphor, a dramatic lesson about hubris or survival? After all, cultures worldwide have myths of lost cities and divine punishment. But here's the twist: the symbols described in these oral traditions match eerily with actual markings found in remote regions, lines scorched into the earth so precisely they defy natural explanation. Coincidence, or proof that somewhere beneath layers of time and ash, a civilization really did burn itself into history's memory? The debate rages on, but one thing's certain: whether fact or fable, this story grips us because it speaks to something primal. It's not just about a city's end, it's about the lengths we'll go to be remembered, to shout across the ages. and that's a flame that never truly dies. Legends may whisper of this city's fate, but the earth holds its own secret scattered fragments that tease the line between myth and reality. Among the most compelling artifacts are shards of pottery, blackened by fire yet etched with symbols that mirror those described in ancient tales. These aren't random scorch marks. The patterns repeat with eerie consistency, as if part of a coded language. One archaeologist described holding a fragment and feeling the weight of intention, every groove purposeful, every curve a deliberate stroke. Then there are the stone tablets, discovered in a valley far from any known settlement, their surfaces carved with maps of winding rivers and jagged peaks that don't correspond to any landscape on record. Were they blueprints for a warning, or perhaps a distorted reflection of a world that no longer exists? The excavation sites themselves fuel debate. In one remote stretch of desert, researchers uncovered layers of sediment fused into glass, a telltale sign of extreme heat, the kind that doesn't come from ordinary fires. Nearby, the ground is scarred with geometric trenches, their edges too precise to be the work of erosion or battle. Skeptics argue these could be remnants of a volcanic eruption or a brutal siege, but here's the catch: no weapons or tools typical of warfare have been found nearby. Instead, the soil yields traces of oils and resins, substances known to intensify and control flames. It's as if the fire was orchestrated, a ritual rather than an accident. Yet for every clue, there's a counter-argument. Could the pottery marking simply be a forgotten artisan's signature? Might the maps be star charts or spiritual diagrams misread by modern eyes? Even the glass-like sediment has parallels in meteorite impacts, leaving room for doubt. But the most haunting question isn't whether these artifacts belong to the fabled city. It's why so much of the evidence feels intentionally cryptic. If this was a warning, why make it so hard to decipher? Unless, of course, the message wasn't meant for just anyone. Unless it was meant for those smart enough or desperate enough to understand. And then there are the maps themselves, not crude sketches but sprawling, almost living designs that seem to shift under scrutiny. Some researchers swear the symbols align with celestial events, while others insist they're a dire geological forecast. But to truly grasp their meaning, we need to step inside the minds of those who made them, to see the world as they saw it, teetering on the edge of oblivion. Among the most haunting of these scorched maps is one dubbed the Widow's Web, a vast, intricate network of lines radiating from a central point like cracks in glass. Some researchers swear these aren't random fractures, but precise renderings of seismic activity, with each jagged fork corresponding to fault lines we've only recently mapped with satellites. Even stranger, clusters of circular symbols dotting the design align almost perfectly with known volcanic hotspots across the region. Could this be a geological forecast burned into the earth by people who knew their land was doomed? Others argue the map depicts something more celestial, the looping paths of comets or the ominous dance of planets, a warning written in the stars themselves. Then there's the Drowning Plain, a series of wavy, parallel grooves that some linguists insist aren't mere carvings, but a form of proto-writing. When overlaid with modern flood maps, these grooves eerily trace the paths of ancient riverbeds long since dried up, or in some cases, areas now submerged by rising seas. One team of cryptographers became convinced the map wasn't just marking water, but predicting its return. They point to a recurring symbol resembling a tilted vessel, which appears alongside what might be numbers or counts of days. Could this be a countdown to catastrophe? Skeptics dismiss it as pareidolia, our tendency to find patterns where none exist. After all, rivers shape landscapes predictably. Maybe the creators were simply recording what they saw, not what was coming. But the most chilling theory comes from a group of astronomers who noticed something peculiar about a third map, the Black Wheel. Its concentric circles, initially thought to depict crop cycles, align uncannily with rare planetary conjunctions, events linked in other ancient cultures to upheaval and disaster. Even more unsettling, the map includes a small, six-pointed mark in one sector that matches the exact position of a supernova visible from Earth around the time the city supposedly burned. Was this their tipping point, a celestial omen so terrifying it spurred them to act? Decades of code-breaking have yielded more questions than answers. Some researchers insist the maps are practical, a survival guide for future generations. Others hear something more desperate in their design, the marks of a civilization that saw the cliff's edge and chose to scream across time. Whether prophecy or coincidence, one truth remains: these scorched warnings were meant to last, and in their stubborn refusal to fade, they've done just that. What could drive an entire civilization to turn their world to ashes as a form of communication? The theories behind this sacrifice stretch from the divine to the desperate, each more haunting than the last. Some scholars argue this was a religious act of unparalleled devotion, a city willingly becoming an offering to forces beyond human understanding. Ancient texts from distant cultures describe similar rituals, where flames were thought to carry messages to the gods, rising on smoke like prayers. Perhaps these people believed their destruction would appease angry deities or cleanse some unseen corruption. There's a chilling precedent for this: the Norse myth of Ragnarok, where the world is consumed by fire not as an end, but as a prelude to renewal. Could this city have seen their flames as a kind of sacred rebirth? Others propose a darker motivation, not devotion but despair. Imagine standing at what you believe is the end of history, convinced your people are the last flicker of light in a dying world. Archaeological evidence suggests this city existed during a time of widespread upheaval, with neighboring settlements abandoned due to drought or war. If they thought collapse was inevitable, their burning might have been less a sacrifice and more a time capsule, a way to etch their hard-won wisdom into the earth. The parallels are eerie. Modern doomsday preppers stockpile knowledge in bunkers, while these ancient people used fire as their preservation tool. Both acts spring from the same human impulse to shout into the void, "We were here, and this is what we learned." The psychological weight of such a decision is almost unbearable to contemplate. Picture the final days, families debating whether to stay and burn or flee into the unknown. Leaders wrestling with the morality of asking others to die for a message that might never be read. The sheer scale of the act suggests an unnerving unity, a shared conviction that this was the only way. Historians point to mass suicides in besieged cities like Masada, where people chose death over subjugation. But this was different. This wasn't about defiance or escape. It was about transmission, a city transforming itself into a signal fire, hoping against hope that someone, someday, would see the smoke and understand. And that's what lingers, not just the why, but the how. How does a person wake up on their last morning and pick up a torch instead of a weapon? How does a community steady its hands to carve warnings, not farewells? The answer might lie in something deeper than religion or survival instinct. It might be the oldest human story of all, the refusal to let the darkness have the final word. Among the most tantalizing clues are the scattered accounts from travelers and historians who claim to have witnessed, or at least heard whispers of the city's fiery end. One ancient merchant's diary, preserved in a desert monastery, describes a great pyre on the horizon that burned for 7 nights, its glow visible even from a week's journey away. The writer notes a peculiar detail. The flames didn't spread chaotically but seemed to dance in lines, as if guided by unseen hands. Another text, a fragment of a Greek explorer's log, speaks of meeting refugees with singed clothing and hollow eyes who muttered about the ones who wrote with fire. When pressed, they refused to say more, as if the words themselves were cursed. But how much weight can we give these accounts? Skeptics argue that fire was a common metaphor in ancient writings, symbolizing purification, divine wrath, or rebirth. The Seven Nights motif, for instance, appears in dozens of cultures as a sacred number, casting doubt on the diary's literal truth. Even the refugee story could be a trope. After all, tales of traumatized survivors warning others are staples of folklore worldwide. Yet there's a striking consistency in the details across these sources. From the Indus Valley to the Mediterranean, unrelated texts describe not just any fire, but one that behaved unnaturally, almost intelligently. A Babylonian astronomer's clay tablet even records an anomaly in the night sky around the same time, a red haze that distorted the stars for months. Coincidence or corroboration? The most compelling case comes from an unexpected place, trade records. Ledgers from a coastal trading post note a sudden halt in shipments of a rare resin, one that, when burned, leaves behind the same glassy sediment found at excavation sites. The last entry simply states, "No more from the inland people. They say the fire has taken their words." This isn't mythic prose, it's the dry notation of commerce. And it raises a spine-chilling possibility that the city's story wasn't just preserved by chance, but actively disseminated. Like a chain of human signal fires, survivors may have carried fragments of the warning outward, embedding it in songs, laws, and even children's rhymes. That's the real enigma. If these accounts are echoes of a true event, why didn't they fade like other ancient tales? Perhaps because the message wasn't just a story, it was an instruction. Some linguists point to a recurring phrase in regional lullabies, "Sleep, lest you wake the burning scribes." Could this be the city's legacy, a seed planted in the collective memory to sprout when needed? The line between history and folklore blurs here, not from carelessness but by design. After all, the surest way to make a warning last isn't to carve it in stone, but to stitch it into the fabric of how we tell our own stories. Centuries after that city turned itself to ash, we're still grappling with the same urgent question: how do you scream across time? Today's efforts to warn future generations feel eerily similar in their desperation. Take the nuclear waste warning markers designed to last 10,000 years. They're menacing spikes and carved symbols meant to scream danger long after our languages are dust. Or the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, buried in Arctic ice like a biological time capsule, its contents a silent plea. Don't repeat our mistakes. Even our digital legacy, hard drives encased in titanium, orbiting satellites carrying human knowledge, echoes the same impulse that drove an ancient people to burn messages into the earth. The mediums have changed, but the fear remains identical, that those who come after us might stumble blindly into our catastrophes. Yet for all our technology, we might be no closer to clarity than they were. Linguists and anthropologists have spent decades debating how to design a universal nuclear warning symbol, only to conclude that future civilizations could misinterpret even our most careful designs. A jagged lightning bolt might read as divine wrath, not radiation. Concrete monoliths could be mistaken for religious monuments. Some researchers even worry that our warnings might attract curiosity rather than caution, like the ominous "keep out" signs on Egyptian tombs that only fueled treasure hunters. It's a paradox. The more elaborate our attempts, the more cryptic they risk becoming. And that raises a chilling thought: were the burning cities' maps just as misunderstood in their time? What if their warning was actually something else entirely? The haunting parallel lies in the shared fallibility of human communication. We assume our methods are superior because we have science, but time is the great equalizer. Languages mutate, symbols lose meaning, and context evaporates. The people of that city likely believed their fiery glyphs were unmistakable, just as we're certain our skull and crossbones icons are universal. Both could be wrong. What endures isn't the medium, but the raw emotion behind it. Whether carved in stone or scorched into soil, these messages are ultimately acts of vulnerability, a way of saying, "We suffered so you won't have to." This brings us to the map's most urgent modern interrogation. Were they even meant as warnings at all? Recent studies applying wildfire modeling to the scorched patterns suggest an alternative, that some maps might be accidental byproducts of controlled burns, their seeming precision a trick of perspective. Others argue the symbols align too perfectly with known celestial events to be coincidence. The debate mirrors today's climate change discourse, where some see dire prophecy in every melting glacier, while others dismiss patterns as natural fluctuation. Perhaps the real lesson isn't in deciphering ancient messages, but in recognizing how easily desperation can blur the line between signal and noise. As lasers etch warnings onto nickel discs meant to outlast continents, and AI construct self-updating archives, we're forced to wonder, will any of it matter? Or are we, like that lost city, simply writing letters we hope someone will understand, even as the fire closes in? Not everyone is convinced by the fiery map's ominous reputation. Many scientists argue we're seeing what we want to see, projecting modern anxieties onto ancient marks. Geologists point to the widow's web, insisting those so-called fault lines are just fractures from millennia of expanding and contracting soil. They've replicated similar patterns in labs by heating and cooling clay, no apocalyptic intent required. As for the glassy sediment, volcanic activity or even lightning strikes can create identical effects. One researcher dryly noted, "The Earth has been writing its own fiery poetry long before humans showed up." Astronomers are equally skeptical about celestial connections. The black wheel's alignment with planetary conjunctions, statistically inevitable over centuries, with countless stars and endless time, even random scratches could eventually match some cosmic event. As for the supernova symbol, here's the catch. That stellar explosion was visible for weeks across the ancient world. Dozens of cultures recorded it, yet only this one supposedly tied it to doom. Confirmation bias, argues a NASA historian. We cherry-pick the one culture that fits our narrative and ignore the rest who saw it as routine astronomy. Historians land the harshest blows, those prophetic refugee accounts. Many were written centuries after the alleged burning by authors with clear agendas. One text warning of burning scribes was found alongside temple records taxing resin traders, suggesting the prophecy might have been merchant gossip inflated into legend. Even the pottery symbols have mundane explanations: inventory marks, family crests, or territorial claims. Every era has its doomsday cults, notes an anthropologist. The only difference is how long their graffiti lasts. Yet the skeptic's strongest argument isn't about the evidence, it's about us. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures, wired to find meaning in chaos. We see faces in clouds and hear hidden messages in static. Could these maps just be archaeology's version of a Rorschach test, without a recovered key to decode them? Some equivalent to the Rosetta Stone, we're left with educated guesses. And guesses, no matter how compelling, aren't proof. But here's what's fascinating. Even the staunchest critics can't dismiss the maps entirely, because whether by design or accident, they've achieved exactly what their creators might have wanted. They've made us pause, they've made us question, and for a handful of researchers, That's reason enough to keep digging literally, because just beyond the reach of skepticism, there are those who believe the maps hold truth science hasn't caught up to yet. The maps left behind by that burning city have found their most fervent audience not in academic circles, but among a passionate fringe of modern interpreters, researchers, conspiracy theorists, and self-taught historians who see in those scorched lines something science refuses to acknowledge. Take Dr. Leora Vasquez, a former geologist who abandoned her university post after becoming convinced the widow's web wasn't just depicting ancient fault lines, it was forecasting new ones. She's spent the last decade overlaying the map's patterns with seismic activity, claiming it predicted both the 2010 Haiti earthquake and the 2015 Nepal disaster within a 50-mile margin of error. Her evidence, a cluster of symbols near the map's edge that she interprets as dates, counting forward in a base 12 numerical system. Mainstream seismologists dismiss her work as retroactive pattern matching, but her followers pack conference halls hanging on every correlation. Then there's the online collective known as the Ember Seekers, amateur cryptographers who have turned the maps into a living puzzle. Using crowd-sourced algorithms, they've decoded what they believe are cyclical warnings, a 212-year catastrophe cycle hidden in the spacing of the grooves. Their most viral post superimposes the drowning plane map over modern flood zones, highlighting areas like Miami and Jakarta with unnerving accuracy. But here's the twist: they don't see the maps as literal predictions. To them, they're allegorical blueprints for societal collapse, with fire representing war, water standing for political upheaval, and the absence of human figures signaling humanity's erasure by its own hand. It's a Rorschach test for the digital age where ancient ash meets modern anxiety. The allure isn't just in solving the mystery, it's in the act of defiance. These interpreters thrive on pitting intuition against institutional skepticism, casting themselves as lone voices heeding warnings others ignore. There's a romance to it, the idea of being the chosen few who cracked a millennia-old code. Psychologists call it apocalypse cognition, the way looming disaster sharpens our need for meaning. When climate reports feel abstract and politics chaotic, the maps offer a tangible enemy, a clear, if cryptic, threat to decode and combat. Yet this fervor raises uncomfortable questions. What happens when belief hardens into dogma? One group in Eastern Europe has begun activating the maps through ritual burns, attempting to complete what they see as unfinished warnings. Archaeologists warn this erodes the very artifacts they claim to revere. And then there's the darker edge, the online forums where maps are twisted to fit xenophobic narratives, their symbols appropriated as proof of impending invasions or racial purges. The irony stings, a message meant to unite across time, weaponized to divide in the present. This is the tightrope walk of apocalyptic interpretation. Without evidence, it's easy to graft any fear onto those ancient lines. But dismiss it entirely, and we risk silencing a rare bridge between past and present, one that reminds us how fragile civilizations truly are. Perhaps the real warning isn't in the maps themselves, but in what they reveal about us, our hunger for certainty, our terror of oblivion, and the stories we'll cling to when the ground feels unsteady beneath our feet. The question lurking beneath all these debates isn't just about ancient symbols, it's about responsibility. If we treat these scorched maps as genuine warnings, what ripple effects could that have? History offers sobering lessons. Take the case of the Oracle of Delphi, whose cryptic prophecies sent nations to war and kings to ruin. Or the 1930s radio broadcast of War of the Worlds, which sparked mass panic because listeners believed fictional aliens were invading. Humans have a track record of shaping reality around the stories we trust, for better or worse. Apply that to these maps and the stakes feel terrifyingly real. Imagine a government diverting resources to fortify cities against a hypothetical catastrophe etched in ash, only to neglect actual, pressing disasters. Or worse, what if the maps become a self-fulfilling prophecy, with fear of collapse hastening the very breakdown they predicted? Yet there's a flip side. Warnings, even unverified ones, have sometimes spurred societies to avert disaster. The sinking of the Titanic led to lifeboat reforms because people heeded the lesson carved into that tragedy. Climate scientists today wield ancient ice cores like scrolls, using millennia-old air bubbles to shout about rising temperatures. Could these maps serve a similar purpose? Some disaster preparedness experts argue that ambiguous threats can be oddly effective. They force us to confront vulnerabilities we'd otherwise ignore. The maps don't need to be literal to be useful. Their power might lie in the conversations they ignite. But the most unsettling possibility isn't about panic or preparedness, it's about complacency. What if the city was right, and we're dismissing their message because it's too inconvenient to believe? Cultures worldwide have lost wisdom stories, tales of ignored prophecies that later proved true. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia speak of ancient songlines that mapped safe paths through the land, warnings etched in melody. Colonizers dismissed them as myth, only to rediscover their accuracy centuries later. Could we be making the same mistake? The map's symbols might not align with our scientific frameworks, but that doesn't mean they're wrong. After all, indigenous knowledge has often proven ahead of its time, from herbal medicine to celestial navigation. This tension between skepticism and reverence has seeped into modern culture, transforming the burning city from an archaeological oddity into a mirror for our anxieties. Films and novels riff on its themes. Think The Day After Tomorrow's climate allegory or Annihilation's shimmering, unknowable danger. Even video games like Horizon Zero Dawn weave post-apocalyptic worlds where ancient glyphs hold survival clues. The city's legacy isn't in its ashes, but in the stories we graft onto them. Every retelling asks us the same thing: when does a warning become a lifeline? And how do we know when to listen? Perhaps the ethical dilemma isn't about the maps at all, but about us. We live in an age of infinite information and fractured trust, where warnings about pandemics or climate change are politicized into noise. The burning city's real lesson might be about the fragility of communication itself, how easily meaning erodes, and how desperately we cling to signals in the static. Their flames didn't just scorch the earth, they lit a question we're still trying to answer. How loud does a cry need to be to echo across millennia? And when will we finally learn to stop covering our ears? The story of the burning city has seeped into our collective imagination, its flames flickering through novels, films, and games like an unextinguished ember. Take the best-selling novel Ashes of the Cartographers, where the city's elders are reimagined as tragic heroes, burning their library not out of fear, but to preserve knowledge from a tyrannical empire. The book's climactic scene, a scholar etching equations into her own skin before walking into the fire, mirrors the desperation of the original legends, but with a Hollywood twist: sacrifice as defiance. Then there's the indie game Ember Glyphs, where players decode the city's symbols to rebuild a lost civilization, only to discover their choices determine whether history repeats itself. These adaptations share a common thread. The city isn't just a setting, it's a mirror, reflecting our own anxieties about legacy and survival. Environmental collapse looms large in these retellings. The film The Last Map frames the burning as an act of climate activism, with the city's residents torching their oil reserves to halt an oncoming ice age. It's a stark departure from the original legends, where fire was a messenger, not a weapon. Yet both versions tap into the same existential dread, the fear that our world is teetering on the edge, and that drastic action might be the only language the future understands. Even blockbusters like The Fifth Signal borrow the city's motifs, with alien invaders misreading its scorched warnings as an invitation, echoing modern fears of cultural misinterpretation. But why does this narrative cling to us so stubbornly? Perhaps because it's malleable. Unlike rigid myths with fixed morals, the burning city thrives on ambiguity. In one graphic novel, the maps are a hoax concocted by a cult to control the masses. In a Pulitzer-winning play, they're a metaphor for queer erasure, their symbols a coded language of resistance. Each retelling adds layers, turning the city into a Rorschach blot for whatever crisis feels most urgent. The original legends spoke of prophecy. We've rewritten them as parables. Yet for all the creative reinvention, the core mystery remains intact. Linguists still pore over the map's symbols, some arguing they're a lost writing system, others insisting they're purely pictorial. The debate turns on a single, tantalizing clue, a recurring sequence of marks that appears near what might be river glyphs. Cryptographers have tried everything from frequency analysis to AI pattern recognition, but the sequence resists translation. Is it a prayer, a coordinate, or just the scratch marks of a tool dragged through cooling embers? The maps refuse to yield their secrets, and maybe that's why they endure. Not as warnings or art or even history, but as a riddle that refuses to be solved. The symbols scorched into those ancient maps aren't just markings, they're a linguistic labyrinth, a puzzle that's defied translation for centuries. At first glance, the patterns seem almost organic, like the branching veins of a leaf or the cracks in dried mud. But look closer and a structure emerges, repeating sequences, clusters of angular glyphs, and what might be numerical notations. Some researchers swear these are the remnants of a full-fledged writing system, while others argue they're purely symbolic, a visual shorthand meant to convey ideas without words. The debate hinges on one tantalizing detail: the symbols aren't random. They appear in consistent orders near specific landmarks on the maps, suggesting syntax, even grammar. But without a key, without so much as a single bilingual inscription to compare them to, deciphering this language of fire is like trying to reconstruct a song from its echo. Leading the charge is Dr. Elias Venturi, a computational linguist who spent the last decade feeding high-resolution scans of the maps into AI models. His team has identified what they believe are 47 distinct characters, some resembling tools or celestial bodies, others utterly abstract, the most promising breakthrough. A recurring trio of glyphs that always appears near depictions of water sources. Venturi's algorithm flagged it as potentially analogous to the Sumerian symbol for danger, based on its positional frequency. But here's the catch: Sumerian cuneiform and these fire glyphs are separated by thousands of miles and centuries. If there's a connection, it's not direct, it's a linguistic ghost, a whisper of some long-lost trade route or cultural exchange. Not everyone's convinced. Dr. Amara Patel, an epigrapher specializing in undeciphered scripts, argues the symbols are proto-writing at best. She points to the Indus Valley script, another ancient system that remains unreadable despite hundreds of examples. Complexity doesn't equal language, she warns. These could be ownership marks, ritual sigils, even an early form of cartographic notation like labeling a mountain with a zigzag without spelling out mountain. Her skepticism isn't unfounded. Many of the glyphs appear to nest inside larger shapes, a feature seen in Andean quipu knots, which recorded numbers rather than words. The absence of a Rosetta Stone for this script is what makes it so maddening and so magnetic. With Egyptian hieroglyphs, scholars had the luxury of Greek translations carved alongside them. Here, there's no bilingual text, no surviving descendants of the language, not even a clear cultural context to anchor guesses. Every attempted translation is essentially a high-stakes game of charades, where a single misread symbol could spin the entire narrative sideways. Take the infamous spiral column found on 3 separate maps. Some linguists interpret it as a warning about cyclical disasters, while others insist it's a unit of measurement, a way to denote distance or time. Without more examples, both theories remain plausible, mutually exclusive, and utterly unprovable. Technology is chipping away at the mystery. Spectral imaging has revealed faint, previously invisible markings beneath the soot guidelines, perhaps, or corrections, hinting at a meticulous drafting process. Meanwhile, researchers in Zurich are applying steganography techniques, treating the maps like encrypted data. Their wildest hypothesis, that the symbols aren't just meant to be read, but to be layered, with overlapping glyphs creating composite meanings when viewed through firelight or at specific angles. It's a theory that straddles the line between linguistics and art history, suggesting the city's scribes might have invented a form of optical poetry. Yet for all the high-tech tools, the most promising clue might come from an unexpected place: children's toys. Excavations near the alleged city site have uncovered clay tablets with simplified versions of the map symbols, some bearing tiny fingerprints. Were these teaching aids a way to pass the script to the next generation, or merely imitations, the ancient equivalent of toddlers scribbling on scraps? The answer could redefine everything we think we know about the map's purpose, because if this was a language and if it was being taught, then those flames weren't just carrying a warning, they were trying to preserve a voice. And that voice might be closer to speech than we realized. Recent analysis of the glyph's spatial distribution reveals patterns eerily similar to topic chains in spoken language, where related ideas cluster together. Imagine pointing to a river on a map and saying, "Don't drink here, it's poisoned." Now strip away the words, leaving only symbols for water, avoid, and sickness. That's the fragile bridge linguists are trying to build across the centuries. Every new glyph deciphered is another step into the dark, another flicker of understanding snatched from the ashes. Modern archaeologists no longer rely solely on brushes and shovels. They wield lasers, algorithms, and heat-sensitive cameras to peel back layers of time. Take LiDAR, a technology that bathes landscapes in laser pulses, revealing hidden structures beneath dense vegetation or centuries of sediment. When researchers scanned the region where the burning city supposedly stood, the results were staggering. Geometric patterns invisible to the naked eye, stretching for miles like ghostly blueprints. Some match the descriptions in ancient texts, grids of trenches that might have once channeled flames with terrifying precision. But here's the twist: these aren't just scars of destruction. The LiDAR maps show deliberate alignments with solstice sunrises and lunar cycles, suggesting the fire was timed to celestial events. Were they turning their demise into a cosmic signal? Thermal imaging adds another layer to the puzzle. A team in Turkey recently applied it to a cache of charred tablets, uncovering something extraordinary: subsurface text, etched in heat-resistant ink before the burning. The words are still unreadable, but the mere presence of hidden writing hints at a dual narrative, one message for the casual observer, another for those who knew how to look. It's a tactic seen in later cultures, like the Venetian spies who wrote in lemon juice between lines of mundane letters. Were the city's scribes encrypting their final words, trusting only the right eyes or tools to decode them? Artificial intelligence is now joining the hunt, sifting through millennia of data for patterns human minds might miss. One algorithm cross-referenced the scorched maps with global climate records and stumbled onto a chilling correlation. the symbols cluster in regions that later suffered catastrophic droughts. Coincidence, maybe, but another AI trained on ancient disaster myths worldwide flagged a recurring motif, a burning threshold event that multiple cultures linked to societal collapse. The algorithm's conclusion: the maps might not depict a single catastrophe, but a cycle. Yet for every breakthrough, technology unveils new riddles. Multispectral imaging recently revealed faint red pigment in the grooves of the widow's web, suggesting the lines were once filled with a substance that burned hotter than the surrounding material. Chemists identified traces of sulfur and saltpeter ingredients found in early gunpowder. Was this a way to control the fire's path, or something more ritualistic? Even the act of scanning raises ethical dilemmas. Should we digitally reconstruct artifacts damaged by fire, or does that erase the urgency of their original warning? These tools don't just illuminate the past, they force us to confront how we interpret it. A satellite can spot a buried wall, but only a human can ask why it was built. As algorithms parse symbols and lasers map ruins, we're left with a haunting thought. What if the city's message wasn't about the disaster they feared, but the one they knew we'd create? Their ashes might not hold answers, but they've never stopped asking questions. What does it mean to send a message you'll never see received? The burning city's final act forces us to confront one of humanity's oldest obsessions: the desperate need to etch our existence into eternity. From pharaohs building pyramids to scientists encoding DNA with digital data, we've always been a species screaming into the void of time, praying someone will hear us. But this city didn't just want to be remembered, they wanted to protect. Their flames weren't a signature, they were a shield held up for strangers centuries unborn. Consider how differently we approach legacy today. Time capsules buried under schools contain smiling photos and trinkets, cheerful greetings to the future. The Voyager Golden Record spins through space with whale songs and laughter, a cosmic postcard saying, "We were happy." Even our digital archives, terabytes of social media posts preserved in Arctic server farms, feel like hopeful winks to tomorrow. But the burning city's message carries none of this optimism. Their symbols scorched into the earth feel less like a handshake and more like a white-knuckled grip, a plea shouting, "Don't make our mistakes." This dichotomy reveals something profound about human nature. When we're confident in progress, we leave behind art and music. When we're terrified, we leave warnings. The doomsday clock ticking toward midnight, the nuclear waste markers designed to repulse for 10,000 years, these are our modern equivalents of those ancient flames. Yet here's the haunting question: is the burning city's act one of despair or profound hope? On one hand, reducing your world to ashes feels like surrender. But choosing fire as your medium suggests staggering faith, that someone would come after you, that civilization would continue, that your sacrifice might matter. Would we ever go to such extremes? Modern parallels suggest we might. The Svalbard seed vault preserves crops for doomsday scenarios behind blast doors, while tech billionaires fund consciousness uploading projects to cheat death digitally. Our methods are less dramatic than self-immolation, but the impulse is identical: to stretch our influence beyond our lifespan. The key difference: we trust ice and silicon to preserve our legacy. They trusted symbols seared into the land itself. This brings us to the core philosophical rift among researchers. One camp sees the city's fate as tragic, a people so convinced of impending doom they chose annihilation over slow decay. Others view it as triumphant, arguing that turning destruction into communication is humanity's ultimate act of defiance against time. Both interpretations hinge on an unanswerable question: did they burn their city to say, "The end is coming"? or the end doesn't have to be yours. Perhaps their true message wasn't in the symbols at all, but in the act itself, a demonstration that some truths are worth consuming everything to convey. As we scroll through our own digital warnings about climate change or pandemic preparedness, we're forced to wonder, what would we sacrifice to make the future listen? Not with polite letters, but with a scream etched in fire. Now, as the embers of this mystery cool, we're left tracing their contours, not just in the soil, but in ourselves. Because every generation believes it stands at the precipice. Every civilization leaves maps. The only question is whether anyone will bother to read them. Was the burning city truly consumed by its own flames, or did its people vanish into the winds of history, carrying their secrets to distant lands? The dispersal theory challenges everything we think we know, suggesting the fire wasn't an end but a smokescreen. Geneticists studying isolated populations in the Caucasus Mountains recently stumbled onto a curious anomaly: clusters of DNA markers that don't match any known regional lineage. These genetic orphans appear abruptly in the archaeological record around the same era as the city's supposed destruction, nestled within communities thousands of miles away. Could these be the descendants of refugees who fled the flames? Oral histories from these mountain villages add fuel to the theory. Elders speak of the ash-born, strangers who arrived with singed cloaks and eyes full of sorrow, teaching strange methods of metalworking and star navigation. One particularly striking legend describes newcomers who could read the Earth's bones, predicting landslides and mineral deposits with uncanny accuracy, skills that align eerily with the precision of those scorched maps. Even their burial customs raise eyebrows: cremated remains placed in ceramic urns, etched with symbols nearly identical to those found at the city's excavation sites. But here's where the dispersal theory fractures. Some anthropologists argue these connections are circumstantial. The genetic markers could stem from earlier, forgotten migrations, and symbols often converge independently across cultures. Others propose a middle path. Perhaps only a privileged few escaped, the city's scribes or leaders, tasked with preserving knowledge while the rest remained to enact the burning. This would explain why the ash-born in legends are always described as scholars, never farmers or soldiers. The most radical interpretation comes from a small but vocal group of historians who believe the fire was never literal. They point to ancient texts describing spiritual burnings, where communities would ritually destroy effigies of their homes to ward off evil. Could the city have staged an elaborate ceremony, dismantling their buildings symbolically before scattering to new land? Excavations have yet to uncover mass graves or evidence of widespread trauma, leaving room for this unsettling possibility. Yet for all these theories, one stubborn fact remains: the maps themselves. Their precision suggests not a panicked exodus, but meticulous preparation. Whoever created them had time, resources, and chilling certainty. This paradox leads us to the fringes of speculation, to a theory so controversial it blurs the line between archaeology and science fiction. Because if the city's people didn't perish and didn't simply flee, did they cross into something even more unimaginable? The answer might lie not in the earth or stars, but in the fabric of time itself. Among the wildest theories surrounding the burning city is the idea that its people didn't belong to their own era at all. Proponents of the time traveler hypothesis point to the impossible precision of the map's depictions of celestial alignments centuries in the future, or geological shifts no ancient civilization could have predicted. The most cited evidence, a cluster of symbols on the Black Wheel map that bear a striking resemblance to modern schematics, interlocking circles that look eerily like atomic models, or jagged lines that could pass for electrical circuits. There's even a series of glyphs near the map's edge that some claim mirror the double helix structure of DNA, a pattern no human could have consciously drawn before the 20th century. But let's pause here. Mainstream science dismisses this as textbook pareidolia, our brains latching onto familiar shapes in random patterns. The atomic symbols might depict seeds or stars. The circuits could be irrigation channels. And the DNA-like glyphs, they're more likely stylized snakes, a common motif in ancient creation myths. Even if we entertain the idea, the physics of time travel remain firmly in the realm of fiction. Einstein's equations allow for theoretical time dilation near black holes, but sending human consciousness or matter backward violates causality. As one physicist quipped, if time tourists were possible, we'd have already met them or been erased by their meddling. Yet the hypothesis persists, fueled by oddities that resist simple explanation. Take the Drowning Plain map's depiction of coastal erosion patterns matching 21st century satellite data. Or the way certain symbols cluster in sequences that align with solar flare cycles we've only recently understood. Could these be coincidences? Absolutely. But in the absence of a definitive translation, the maps become a mirror for our own technological anxieties. The time traveler theory isn't really about the past. It's about our fear that progress might be a closed loop, that every breakthrough is just a rediscovery. What makes this idea so sticky isn't its plausibility, but its emotional resonance. It transforms the city from a cautionary tale into something grander, a failed intervention, a future that tried to rewrite itself. Imagine standing at the brink of annihilation, hurling warnings backward like bottles into the cosmic sea, hoping one might wash up where it's needed. That desperation feels uncomfortably familiar in an age of climate reports and pandemic models. The truth may be less cinematic, but no less compelling. Those anachronistic symbols might not be blueprints from the future. They could be records of past disasters. Ancient astronomers tracked comet cycles. Cultures dependent on rivers documented floods over generations. The map's precision might reflect hard-won knowledge, not prophecy. And that's the real twist. You don't need time travel to send a message across millennia. You just need the courage to believe someone someday will care enough to decipher it. Now, let's turn to the environmental secrets hidden in those scorched lines, clues that might explain why this city saw catastrophe where others saw only another sunrise. The scorched maps left behind by this enigmatic civilization might hold more than cryptic symbols. They could be an ecological time capsule, a stark record of environmental collapse written in the language of fire. When researchers overlay the twisting lines of the Drowning Plain with pollen samples from ancient lakebeds, a disturbing pattern emerges. The symbols cluster where tree species like oak and cedar once thrived, only to vanish from the fossil record around the same era. Even more telling are the jagged marks resembling stumps near river glyphs, suggesting not just natural deforestation, but systematic clearing. This wasn't a gradual shift, it was a tipping point. Similar scars appear in the archaeological record of Easter Island, where the last palm tree felled was both an act of survival and suicide. But here's the chilling difference: the Easter Islanders left no warning. Their collapse was a silent lesson. The burning city, by contrast, seems to have turned their environmental autopsy into a manifesto. Zoom in on the widow's web, and you'll find what some hydrologists believe are watershed maps tracking sediment buildup. The symbols grow denser where rivers fork, mirroring modern satellite images of eroded farmland. Soil samples from these areas reveal something startling: layers of charcoal and heavy metals, remnants of early smelting operations. It's as if they were mapping their own industrial downfall, marking where copper runoff poisoned the very waters that fed their fields. Parallels to today are unavoidable. Think of the arsenic-laced soils around ancient Roman mines, or the mercury still leaching from gold pits abandoned by the Inca. The maps might be humanity's first environmental impact report, etched in flames instead of filed in triplicate. Yet the most haunting symbols are the ones that defy simple explanation. Near the edges of several maps, concentric rings ripple outward like shock waves, intersecting with what could be villages or granaries. Some researchers interpret these as drought cycles, noting their resemblance to tree ring sequences from megadroughts. Others see something more ominous: saltwater encroachment, a creeping death for freshwater springs. Modern examples like the salinization of Mesopotamia's irrigated fields or the sinking deltas of the Indus Valley come to mind, disasters born of engineering hubris. The irony is crushing. If these maps really are blueprints of ecological suicide, then the city's fiery finale wasn't just a warning, it was a reenactment. They burned themselves into the land the same way they'd burned through its resources. What makes this interpretation so unsettling is its familiarity. Today's climate graphs the hockey stick curves of CO2, the red splotches on ocean heating maps, could easily be the modern equivalents of those ancient glyphs. We've just swapped soot for satellites. The real question isn't whether the city foresaw their collapse, but why their meticulous records failed to prevent it. Perhaps the answer lies not in the soil, but in the stars, because woven between these ecological clues are symbols of another kind: crescent moons clasping sun disks, towers crowned with flames, figures kneeling before what might be altars. This suggests their environmental reckoning wasn't just scientific, it was sacred, and that shifts the narrative entirely. When survival becomes a prayer, even the most rational warnings can turn to ash in the face of faith. The line between divine mandate and collective madness blurs when we examine the spiritual undercurrents that may have driven the city's fiery act. Ancient texts from neighboring cultures describe a priesthood obsessed with celestial omens, scrolls filled with records of eclipses, comet sightings, and planetary alignments interpreted as divine missives. One particularly chilling tablet, now housed in the Damascus Museum, speaks of a cleansing flame foretold by stargazers, a purging fire that would scour the unworthy from the earth. Could this have been the spark that ignited the city's fate? The parallels to doomsday cults throughout history are impossible to ignore. From the medieval flagellants who whipped themselves to ward off the Black Death to the Heaven's Gate followers who donned matching sneakers for their cosmic rendezvous, history brims with groups who saw annihilation as transcendence. But what sets this city apart is the sheer scale of their conviction. Not a fringe group, but an entire civilization acting in unison. The psychological terrain of such a decision is treacherous to navigate. Modern sociologists point to the apocalypse cognitive loop, where shared trauma and rigid belief systems amplify each other. Imagine the pressure cooker of a society where priests declare the end nigh, where every drought and earthquake is framed as divine wrath, where dissent is silenced by the sheer momentum of collective certainty. We've seen glimpses of this in modern times: the Jonestown Massacre's poisoned punch, the Solar Temple's ritual suicides, but always as tragic exceptions, not societal norms. What made this city different? Archaeologists uncover clues in the layout of their temples, concentric circles of altars where artifacts suggest escalating rituals, from animal sacrifices to, finally, the burning of precious textiles and grain stores. This wasn't sudden hysteria, it was the crescendo of a long, grim symphony. Yet labeling this as mere fanaticism oversimplifies the story. Recent excavations reveal something startling. The city's elite lived humbly, their homes barely distinguishable from commoners. No hoarded wealth, no hidden escape tunnels. If this was manipulation by power-hungry leaders, where were the spoils? Instead, we find egalitarian graves, each containing a single, identical token, a clay disc bearing the same symbol found on the maps. This suggests a horrifying possibility that the citizens weren't coerced but convinced, that they saw their sacrifice not as death but as metamorphosis. The most disturbing question isn't whether they believed, but why their belief took this particular shape. Comparative mythology offers a clue. In Zoroastrian tradition, fire is a divine intermediary carrying prayers to the heavens. Hindu cremation rituals envision flames releasing the soul from its earthly bonds. Even the Judeo-Christian tradition speaks of God appearing as a burning bush sacred fire that illuminates rather than consumes. Viewed through this lens, the city's act becomes something more nuanced than suicide, a ritual of unbearable intimacy with the divine, where the medium was their own world. But psychology warns us against romanticizing this. The same mental mechanisms that allow soldiers to charge machine guns for their country, the suppression of individual survival instincts for a perceived greater good, can warp into catastrophes when paired with apocalyptic thinking. The city's priests may have genuinely believed they were saving future generations. Their followers may have walked into the flames with beatific smiles. Yet the aftermath, the silence where a civilization once thrived, forces us to confront the dark potential of conviction unchecked by doubt. As we sift through the ash layers of history, we're left not with answers but with a mirror. In an age where algorithms feed our biases and crises amplify our extremes, the burning city whispers a warning not about gods or comets, but about the human mind's capacity to turn belief into its own kind of fire, one that can warm or consume, illuminate or erase. The line between prophecy and panic, it seems, was as thin then as it is now. Mass psychology offers a window into the collective unraveling of a civilization convinced its end was not just inevitable but necessary. The final days of the burning city must have been a pressure cooker of fear, devotion, and grim resolve, a society teetering between despair and transcendence. Studies of doomsday cults reveal eerie parallels. The Heaven's Gate group's coordinated suicides, the Jonestown tragedies poisoned Kool-Aid, even the ancient Jewish rebels at Masada choosing death over Roman enslavement. These groups shared a common thread, an unshakable belief that their sacrifice held cosmic significance. But what sets the burning city apart is scale. This wasn't a fringe group, it was an entire population marching into the flames together. The mechanics of such a decision likely hinged on a perfect storm of leadership and shared trauma. Charismatic figures throughout history, from cult leaders like Jim Jones to wartime demagogues, have weaponized uncertainty, offering salvation through submission. Were the city's elders enlightened seers or master manipulators? Excavations of council chambers reveal unsettling clues. Stone benches arranged in concentric circles, suggesting staged debates where dissent could be isolated, and clay tablets praising the clarity of the flame watchers. This hints at a carefully cultivated hierarchy where doubt was framed as weakness and conformity as courage. Yet there's a twist: the absence of lavish tombs or hidden stockpiles suggests the leaders burned alongside their people. This wasn't hypocrisy, it was horrifying sincerity. Modern neuroscience sheds light on how such consensus forms. Under prolonged stress, group dynamics shift toward herding behavior, where the fear of exclusion overrides individual survival instincts. Add environmental catastrophes, droughts, famines, quakes, and you have fertile ground for apocalyptic thinking. The city's surviving murals depict crowds moving toward fire with outstretched hands, not fleeing. Some show children holding torches alongside adults, a detail that chills to the bone. This wasn't just compliance, it was indoctrination woven into the fabric of daily life. But the most disturbing question lingers: could it happen again? History whispers yes. The 20th century alone saw mass suicides under the Khmer Rouge, wartime kamikaze pilots, even the wave of revolutionary zeal during China's Cultural Revolution. What changes isn't human psychology, but the narratives that exploit it. Today's doomsday scenarios, climate collapse, AI singularity, pandemics, could theoretically trigger similar ruptures in rationality. The difference: our warnings are digital, our leaders more scrutinized, our outlets for dissent more numerous. Or so we tell ourselves. Among the few artifacts that survived the city's flames, none are more revealing than the so-called last voices, clay cylinders etched with personal messages before burning. One reads, "My hands shake, but my heart is steady. The children must not see." Another, "Tell them we chose this." These aren't the words of brainwashed drones, but of people who truly believed they were lighting the way for generations unborn. That's what haunts most, not the madness of the act, but the terrifying humanity behind it. The same impulse that drives parents to throw themselves before bullets for their kids, twisted into something monstrous by the alchemy of fear and faith. Perhaps the ultimate warning isn't in the maps they left, but in the mental precipice they approached, and the ease with which any of us might follow. Among the most haunting relics tied to the burning city is the so-called Ember Codex, a charred manuscript recovered from a collapsed temple chamber, its pages so brittle they crumble at a touch. What makes this fragmentary book so extraordinary are the marginal notes scrawled in a later hand, possibly a scholar's desperate attempt to translate the city's cryptic maps before they were lost to time. Infrared scans reveal tantalizing phrases like "the Earth's bones shift here," next to symbols matching the Widow's Web fault lines, and 7 harvests remain beside a series of drought glyphs. But the Codex is a tease as much as a treasure. Every preserved page sits beside 10 others reduced to ash, leaving historians to piece together meanings from half-sentences and ink blurs. Preserving these artifacts has become a race against decay. At the University of Bergen, scientists now store the Codex in an argon-filled vault, handling it only with electrostatic gloves to prevent further disintegration. Meanwhile, teams at Cambridge are experimenting with nanoscale 3D imaging to unburn sections digitally, a painstaking process that rebuilds each letter from carbon shadows. The urgency is palpable. Last year, a ceramic tablet inscribed with map symbols cracked spontaneously in its climate-controlled case, its internal stresses finally giving way after centuries. Conservators liken the work to defusing bombs. One wrong move and irreplaceable knowledge vanishes forever. This fragility hasn't stopped a shadow market from thriving. In 2019, Interpol raided a Paris apartment to find a looted funerary urn purportedly containing scribes' ashes, listed for €8 million on the dark web. More insidious are the forgeries flooding auction houses, chemically aged pottery with gibberish symbols, or newly discovered map fragments that suspiciously match decades-old hoaxes. The most infamous, the Black Vault Scrolls, fooled 3 museums before carbon dating exposed them as 20th century fabrications. These deceptions aren't just crimes, they're obscuring the genuine artifacts that could crack the city's code. Yet for all the noise, the truth still flickers through. A child's leather sandal found near the Drowning Plain map, its sole imprinted with one of the symbols. A kitchen knife whose handle bears the same sequence seen on ritual vessels, suggesting the script permeated daily life. These humble objects whisper that the maps weren't just for elites, they were a language an entire civilization lived by. And if that language could be fully deciphered, well, that brings us to the next chilling question. What if the city wasn't lost at all? What if we've been walking atop its ruins this whole time? Imagine archaeologists breaking ground tomorrow and uncovering an untouched district of the burning city, walls still standing, jars of pigment lined up as if the scribes had just stepped away, and most astonishing of all, a chamber stacked with intact maps, their symbols blazing with unfaded clarity. The discovery would send shockwaves through every field from archaeology to astrophysics. Teams would scramble to decode the symbols, while media outlets blare headlines like "Ancient Doomsday Cult Found" or "Eerily Accurate Predictions in Burnt City Maps." Scientists might initially dismiss the warnings as coincidence, until climatologists notice the drought glyphs align perfectly with current desertification patterns, or seismologists realize the fault lines marked in ash now shudder with renewed activity. The world would hold its breath, waiting to see if these ancient scribes truly saw farther than we ever imagined. Religious communities would split into factions, some declaring the maps divine prophecy, others denouncing them as heretical. Pilgrimages would spring up overnight, with believers kneeling where the embers once fell, while skeptics mocked the frenzy as millennial hysteria rebranded. Governments, meanwhile, would face an impossible choice: pour resources into preparing for catastrophes predicted millennia ago, or risk looking foolish if nothing happens. Imagine the political theater, congressional hearings debating whether to relocate cities based on ancient glyphs, or conspiracy theorists accusing elites of hiding the map's true meaning. The irony: the city's residents likely never imagined their message would arrive so loudly or so late. Yet contrast that earthquake of a discovery with the quieter reality of how most archaeology unfolds. A pottery shard here, a half-buried wall there, each fragment debated for decades before consensus forms. Gradual revelations lack the drama of a single eureka moment, but they're also less likely to be distorted by knee-jerk reactions. Think of how the Dead Sea Scrolls trickled into public consciousness, controversial, yes, but absorbed over time rather than sparking panic. The burning city's warnings might have greater impact if they emerge slowly, allowing each symbol to be tested against modern data before the next is deciphered. This hypothetical forces us to confront a deeper question: are we any better prepared to hear hard truths than those who came before us? The city's story is a mirror reflecting our own tendencies, to worship or dismiss, to act too soon or too late. Their maps, whether prophecy or poetry, remind us that civilizations rise and fall not just by external threats, but by how they choose to listen. The real discovery wouldn't be in the ruins themselves, but in whether we let their ashes blind us or finally see. The burning city's ashes whisper a challenge to our modern world. How do we shout across time when the stakes are this high? Their desperate act turning their homes into a warning forces us to confront a brutal truth. We're surrounded by alarms just as urgent, just as meticulously crafted, yet we've grown numb to the flashing lights. Climate scientists paint graphs in shades of emergency red, their reports stacked like unread prophecies. Indigenous elders recite oral histories of ecological balance, their voices drowned out by the roar of bulldozers. Even the pandemic models that predicted our recent chaos were shelved as abstract fears. The city's people carved their dread into the earth. We file ours in peer-reviewed journals and press releases, then wonder why no one listens. There's a cruel irony here. We have more tools than ever to broadcast warnings, satellites tracking deforestation in real time, algorithms modeling future pandemics, even digital archives designed to outlast millennia. Yet something essential has been lost in translation. The burning city didn't just leave data, they left an experience. Their maps weren't meant to inform, they were meant to sear. When a civilization immolates itself as a message, you don't skim it over breakfast. You stop, you stare, you feel the heat of their conviction through the centuries. Compare that to our climate conferences where delegates debate comma placements in non-binding agreements while glaciers calve into the sea. This isn't about theatrics, it's about psychology. Cognitive researchers know that humans respond to visceral narratives, not spreadsheets. The city's flames were a story written in a language every culture understands: sacrifice. When Greta Thunberg sailed across the Atlantic to confront world leaders, she wasn't just delivering statistics, she was embodying the absurdity of inaction. The Standing Rock protests weren't just about pipeline routes, they were a living map of resistance, bodies forming a barrier against the future the city feared. These modern acts channel the same desperate energy, proving that some truths must be felt to be believed. Yet the most haunting parallel lies in the question of legacy. If our civilization collapsed tomorrow, what would survive? Not tweets or TikTok trends, those servers will blink out within decades. Not even our steel monuments, which will crumple long before those clay maps fade. Perhaps it's the enduring things: seed vaults buried in permafrost, nuclear waste markers carved with skulls and screaming faces, the Voyager golden record spinning its golden hello into the void. But here's the rub: the burning city didn't just want to be remembered, they wanted to steer. Their message wasn't "we were here," it was "turn back." That urgency echoes in today's frontline communities: Pacific Islanders recording tidal gauges on drowned ancestral graves, firefighters tattooing the coordinates of incinerated towns onto their skin. These aren't metaphors, they're modern glyphs etched in ink and grief. The lesson isn't that we should start torching our cities, but that we must stop sanitizing our warnings. Scientists recently proposed adding climate grief to diagnostic manuals, acknowledging the toll of ecological despair. Maybe that's the missing piece, recognizing that effective communication isn't just about transmitting facts, but about sharing the weight of what those facts demand. So what symbols would we leave behind? Not just sterile time capsules, but scars. The melting permafrost's methane bubbles, popping like a Geiger counter for planetary fever. The concrete-tied walls around Manhattan, future archaeologists' first clue to our denial. The plastic layers in the geologic record, our indelible stain. The burning city's true legacy isn't in their prophecies, it's in their refusal to let their end be silent. As expeditions still scour deserts for their ruins, we're left wondering, will anyone dig for ours, or will they already be living in the catastrophe we scribbled warnings about, too late to read them? The search for the burning city has become a pilgrimage for modern explorers, a quest that pulls teams into some of the most inhospitable corners of the planet. Right now, as you watch this, archaeologists are sweating under desert suns, hacking through tangled jungles and scanning satellite images for the faintest geometric anomaly that might betray the city's location. One recent expedition in the Taklamakan Desert, a place so harsh locals call it the Sea of Death, claimed to find a series of aligned stones buried under dunes, their surfaces scorched in a way that mirrored the ancient maps. For 3 feverish days, the team thought they'd cracked the mystery, until lab tests revealed the marks were from a 20th century military exercise. Another group in the Amazon, guided by indigenous stories of the fire scribes, uncovered a network of charcoal-filled trenches, but carbon dating placed them centuries too late, yet another near miss in a trail littered with false hope. What drives these searchers to endure blistering heat, funding shortfalls, and the gnawing possibility they might never find answers? Dr. Rafaela Mendez, who spent 12 years chasing leads across Central Asia, puts it bluntly: it's not about the city anymore. It's about the act of looking. She describes moments of eerie connection, holding a shard of blackened pottery and feeling the imprint of fingers that shaped it millennia ago. For her, the search is a form of time travel, a way to stand shoulder to shoulder with people who screamed into the future. Others, like Professor Henrik Voss, approach it as a cryptographic puzzle. His team has trained machine learning algorithms on the symbols, cross-referencing them with every known ancient script. We're one database update away from a breakthrough, he insists, though his voice carries the weariness of someone who's said those words before. Then there are the quiet searchers, the local guides and amateur historians who have spent lifetimes collecting fragments of oral tradition. In a village near the Anatolian plateau, an elderly storyteller named Aylin recounts a lullaby passed down through generations, its lyrics describing the great burning that wrote upon the sky. She's never heard of the archaeological debates. To her, the city lives in the rhythm of the words, a truth that doesn't require excavation. This duality haunts the hunt, the tension between scientific rigor and the visceral pull of myth. And yet, the most poignant question isn't whether the city will be found, but what happens if it isn't? Does a warning lose its power if the messenger vanishes entirely? The maps suggest otherwise. Their potency lies not in their origin, but in their endurance, the way they've clung to the collective imagination like smoke stains on history's ceiling. Perhaps their true purpose was never to point to a place, but to a pattern. After all, civilizations don't collapse because they lack warnings. They collapse because they stop heeding them. That's the ghost that follows every researcher home from the field. Not the specter of failure, but the realization that they might already be standing in the ruins the city warned about. As one young archaeologist admitted after a fruitless dig, "Sometimes I wonder if we're not the ones who were meant to find the city, but the ones who were meant to become it." The thought lingers heavy as ash in the air, that the most important discoveries aren't always buried in the ground, but hidden in plain sight, waiting for us to read the signs before it's our turn to leave them. Dr. Elena Shaw, a historian specializing in ancient catastrophes, leans over a reconstructed fragment of the map in her Cambridge lab, her voice barely above a whisper. People assume it's about predicting disaster, but look closer. These symbols cluster near trade routes, water sources. This wasn't just a scream into the void, it was a survival manual. Her hands trace the grooves as if reading Braille. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit YouTube studio, self-proclaimed time pattern analyst Jason Rourke projects the widow's web onto a screen dotted with blinking red dots, modern earthquake epicenters. Coincidence, he grins. The math says no. Their base 12 numbering system lines up with seismic cycles we've only just decoded. The comment section explodes with theories, from ancient aliens to government cover-ups. Then there's Maria Gutierrez, a firefighter who survived the Paradise wildfires by sheer luck, or so she thought. During evacuation, her truck broke down near a creek bed. "I saw these lines in the ash," she recounts, fingers trembling around a coffee cup, like the ones from that article I'd read weeks before. The grooves matched a symbol from the drowning plane map, a zigzag meaning seek low ground. She led her crew downhill minutes before the firestorm swallowed the ridge. Some call it pareidolia. I call it a hand reaching through time. Her story ripples through disaster prep forums, where preachers and scientists alike debate whether the maps are guidebooks or ghosts. The legend's grip extends beyond crisis. Teenagers in Oslo paint the city's symbols on underpass walls, tagging them with captions like, "They knew." A support group for climate anxiety uses the burning city as a metaphor. Sometimes you have to let parts of yourself burn to keep going. Even corporate workshops invoke it, with executives role-playing as the city's elders deciding what wisdom to preserve. The paradox is striking. A civilization that erased itself now fuels countless reinventions. But beneath the reinterpretations thrums a raw nerve when podcast host Leela Chen asks listeners, "What would you burn to save the future?" The answers range from student loans to entire political systems. The city's story has become a Rorschach blot for our collective unease, its flames reflecting everything from anti-capitalist rage to transhumanist dreams. Archaeologists groan at the liberties taken, yet even they admit the map's true power lies in their incompleteness. A fragment can become anything, a prophecy, a prayer, a Rube Goldberg machine of meaning. As the theories multiply, one thread remains taut. Whether seen as doomed soothsayers or pragmatic cartographers, the city's people did something extraordinary. They weaponized their own erasure, turning oblivion into a message bottle tossed across millennia. And now, as climate reports blare and algorithms hum with apocalyptic predictions, we're left to wonder, are we the intended recipients of that bottle? Or are we just another civilization scribbling notes we hope someone someday will think to read? The maps don't answer, they only ask, will you be the one who finally listens? Were they prophets or prisoners of their own fear? That's the weighty question hanging over every scorched groove of these ancient maps. On one side, the eerie precision of their predictions of fault lines that match modern seismic data, drought symbols aligned with pollen records of vanished forests. It's hard to dismiss as coincidence when hydrologists overlay the drowning plain with satellite images of today's sinking deltas and find near-perfect matches. Then there's the black wheel, its celestial markers aligning with supernova and planetary conjunctions they couldn't possibly have calculated without advanced astronomy. Skeptics argue these are just lucky guesses, that with enough symbols scrawled across enough land, some are bound to align with future events. But when independent teams from Kyoto to Buenos Aires run the numbers, the statistical probability of so many hits starts feeling less like chance and more like chilling foresight. Yet the counterarguments hold unsettling weight too. Take the widow's web. Those fault lines could simply be cracks from seasonal soil shifts, their alignment with earthquakes a classic case of hindsight bias. The famed resin storage pits might have held incense for rituals, not fuel for apocalyptic cartography. Even the celestial patterns crumble under scrutiny. The same stars have been linked to doomsday prophecies in dozens of cultures, from the Mayans to the Babylonians, yet their predicted collapses never materialized. Psychologists point to our brain's knack for cherry-picking patterns, a survival mechanism that once helped spot predators in tall grass, but now spins conspiracy theories from static. Maybe the city didn't foresee the future at all. Maybe they just reflected their own fears onto the landscape, like we do with climate models and economic forecasts today. Here's where the debate twists into something richer. Whether their warnings were divine visions or desperate graffiti, the maps achieved something extraordinary. They forced us to confront time itself. Most ancient civilizations built monuments to glorify their present pyramids, colosseums, golden idols. This city burned theirs to speak to us. That act, regardless of its accuracy, rips open a raw ethical question. What do we owe the future? Modern ethicists wrestle with this daily. The builders of Finland's Onkalo nuclear waste repository face it as they design warning markers to last 100,000 years. Climate activists shouting at indifferent governments channel it. Even a parent saving for a child's education grapples with it on a smaller scale. The city's real legacy isn't in predicting disasters, but in proving that civilizations can care beyond their own lifespan. And that's where the maps transcend archaeology. They've become a mirror for our own fractured relationship with tomorrow. Today's prepper movement stockpiles beans and bullets, interpreting the glyphs as proof of inevitable collapse. Tech optimists see them as a cautionary tale against doomerism, proof that fear can become self-fulfilling. Artists recast the symbols as emblems of resilience, tattooing them alongside climate protest slogans. The truth might be messier, a blend of observation and obsession, science and superstition, but perhaps that's the point. The maps don't need to be right to matter. They simply remind us that the line between prophecy and panic isn't carved in stone, but etched in choices. Every climate policy enacted, every seed bank stocked, every nuclear de-escalation treaty signed. These are our own glyphs, our own flames held up against the dark. The city's question wasn't, "Will you believe us?" It was, "Will you act like someone someday might need you to?" Now, as the embers of this mystery glow faintly on our screens, they leave us with one final flicker of light, not from the past, but from the future we're already shaping. Because if there's anything the maps teach us, it's that warnings aren't about certainty. They're about love, stubborn and scorching, stretched across time. And that's a fire no archaeology can ever fully bury. There's something undeniably poetic about a civilization that chose flames as their final language, not just destruction, but transformation. They could have faded quietly into history, their names erased by wind and time. Instead, they turned their homes into parchment, their bodies into ink, searing their message into the earth with a clarity that still smolders centuries later. Whether these were prophets or prisoners of despair, their act transcends archaeology. It becomes a mirror. What would we sacrifice to be heard across the ages? Not just words in a time capsule, but something raw, undeniable. The burning city's legacy isn't in the precision of their predictions, but in the brutal elegance of their method. They understood that some truths must be felt to be believed, and that's what lingers, not the symbols themselves, but the silence they disrupt. Right now, we're surrounded by warnings just as urgent, just as meticulously crafted. Ice cores drilling deeper into climate history, algorithms modeling pandemic curves, indigenous elders recounting generations of ecological wisdom. Yet we file these alerts under "someday," as if the future is a distant country we'll never visit. The burning city forces us to ask, are we any better at listening than those who came before us? Or are we too busy shouting over the echoes of the past to hear the whispers of tomorrow? This isn't just about ancient history, it's about the stories we're writing right now. Every climate protest, every preserved seed vault, every line of code in a digital archive, these are our own maps scorched into the landscape of time. The difference is, we still have the chance to ensure they're not just warnings, but blueprints for something better. The city's people may have seen their fate as inevitable, but we don't have to. Their flames don't have to be our future, so here's the challenge they leave us. What would you burn to say to the centuries ahead? Not your home, perhaps, but your complacency. Your indifference, and more crucially, what warnings are you ignoring today because they're written in a language you refuse to understand? The maps are still out there, waiting to be read. Not just in the desert sands or the charred fragments of pottery, but in the rising tides, the shifting weather patterns, the unheeded cries of those already living the consequences. The mystery of the burning city doesn't end with this video. It lives in the comments you'll leave, the debates you'll have, the way you'll look at the world after hearing their story. So tell me, do you think they were right, or were they tragically mistaken? Drop your theories below and keep digging, because some stories refuse to stay buried. And some flames, well, they're still waiting to light.